Okay, this lesson for the Koine Project class concerns the rapture again, and the rationale for why problems with the rapture are not doctrinal. They are dispensational. And I've referenced more than one form or expression of dispensationalism. That is, one form of dispensationalism says there is a rapture in Matthew 24. Another form or type of dispensationalism when it comes to this particular feature concerning the rapture, because we all believe the rapture. That's a doctrine. That's the Bible doctrine of the rapture. Well, another one then says there is no rapture. One says there is in Matthew 24. Also, there's historic premillennialism, which said the rapture was at the end of the tribulation. Then there's dispensational premillennialism, and the late historic Dr. J.R. Graves taught pre-trib rapture premillennialism, and he said that the rapture occurred in phases, and so did Thiessen, and also Dr. Bob Wilkin subscribes to that. But the fascinating thing that occurred for me as long ago as 1989, I was teaching a Sunday school class, and people were insisting on where did I consider the rapture to occur. So I was studying the language and would teach a class just like I'm about to show you, and I would take the text and put it on the board and explain it. Because what I want to do is I always made it clear that you all believe whatever you want, meaning we had pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, all were premillennial. When people believe the gap theory, I've even known a professor of the oldest Bible school in Arkansas called it the gap fact. So he was very adamant about it. And he was the language professor. That is, when I say I know him, I had him as my professor in language class where we were discussing the Hebrew, the Strong's number H, 1961, ha-yah, the inflected form ha-yathah, Cal perfect third feminine singular. And you say, man, what is all that? Exactly. So unless you were in that class or like in a class where we stopped and people that were there who wanted to, as in this Koine Project class, if you want to review the language. So I was working on staff first time in 1995 at the church I pastor now in Jacksonville, Arkansas, and I always inform them that you all believe what you want, meaning I had no idea why they wanted what their rationale was, and I had no right to demand from them a rationale. I told them I would just want to have the freedom, and I did, and they more than happily gave me that, to look at what the Bible might actually say. Now, how do you move from this text we're looking at now, and we will in just a moment, how do you move from that to pre-trib, premillennial, from post-trib, premillennial, which is called historical, and then there's mid-trib, same faith, for example, Baptist. I'll just use the very strict, highly, what we'd say, they really want it explicitly stated, biblicist in the very literal sense, and those who recognize and highly regard the Lord's New Testament church. And again, I've known we have someone now that's been at the fellowship I'm at now over 70 years. So these people are dyed in the wool. They want to support, participate in the church. So I just said, I'll just tell you what the Bible might actually say. So I would add to their knowledge. And we actually had a person teaching post-trib in Sunday school class, another person teaching pre-trib in a Sunday school class. And both of them, one had back in the old days before all the computer technology, but he had built charts from mechanical drafting and had them framed, glass covered. I mean, they covered the room. They were enormous and very well done. And then in the pre-trib class, that teacher, he had large 3-ring binders and all of his work printed out and placed in these plastic sleeves. And it was an enormous amount of work. Now, it was striking to me that I could still find people who would value or devalue those teachers based on the segment. I think the last 3.5 years where we all agree that at that moment it would be considered great, escalated, tribulation breaks out, and great and terrible things happen on the earth. So I was just struck by how much these two people knew and could teach and would teach from Genesis to Revelation and show and give the rationale, and agreed on so many things that you could just go to one class to the next. And when they weren't speaking of where they marked the chart on the pre or post, you could learn much about the Bible. So I was very encouraged that they were mature enough, if you will, adult enough to respect each other. And that, like I said, that's the kind of fellowship it is. So I wanted to know and ask them to make sure that they knew what I would do. So I'll just show you what I would do, and then what the people who didn't know me and would come later to our class or to our church and then get involved, I would be writing something out like this, for example. 1 Thessalonians 4:17 says, then we ourselves, well, let me read verse 16. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we go to this text, and then we ourselves, the ones who are living, and I would write it out just like this. And those of you that have any familiarity with this class know that that's exactly the way we do it. The ones who are remaining around. See the word preposition around. Here's the word from lepo, remainder. So the ones who are remaining around will be seized away simultaneously together with them. And I wouldn't get to this word here. And then as I'd emphasize this one, someone, the newer kind, who didn't come in and want to add to their knowledge or their portfolio. Now, I wanted to understand the rationale for pre-trib. That was difficult for me to become acquainted with pre-trib. I was just rapture. If you mentioned the word trib, you couldn't even get tribulation out of your mouth. You lost me at trib. I viewed that as standing at the edge of a great gulf, and I did not want to peer over it. I didn't want to be near it. I didn't want anything to do with it. That was nothing to do with me. We were taught, if I remember, as children. It was early back in the 70s. Any minute, the Lord could come. We'd be gone in just an instant, always being ready. And it's a great thing, because I'll just interrupt here for a testimony that I remember when I was on a job site, manual work. All the work I did was very excruciating manual work for years, until I finally was able to quit work and just be a manager and be responsible for a lot of things. It was more like thinking and talking in a room to me. It wasn't really, but on the job site, there was a very crude expression being made and ridiculed toward a young lady that they were familiar with, apparently. And she had turned her life around and turned from her evil ways, literally, and did not want to live any longer the way she was living. And what made it funny, the punchline was, they said why she did it was because she wanted to be ready for Jesus, if Jesus were to call her to come home, if you will, rapture her. And I was really disappointed in the people I was working with to find that they would deride and ridicule someone. So when they found out that I believed likewise that I would want to live my life ready, because you only have this life to live in a manner to be ready for Christ and his return. So if you, as we were taught, any moment, which is fine, I have no problem with it. It's just I don't remember it being associated with tribulation. That was just my blind spot. So they finally get me to the pre-trib point. So I get to this point in class and someone says, oh, you're one of those post-tribbers. And I'm backed up and I pointed to the board and I said, no, this is what the text is saying. But in their mind, I now understand, so I can see it from their view now. They thought that the Bible classes could be nothing more than you're building an argument for your view or against someone else's view. And I suppose that did not occur to me for years. I continued to wonder why they were so contentious, unintentionally, of course. They didn't mean it. There was no malice from them. Now, for some who came there to try to make sport out of it, I have a great talent for quelling that, because if I think for a moment that someone's being malicious and wanting to be diminutive or ridicule someone, as those people on that job site were laughing at this young girl who had turned her life around to be ready, because any minute she would be in front of the presence of the Lord, which is true if you think about the fact that our lives can be gone tomorrow. I may not even be alive to review this video in the future on YouTube. So that's true. That imminent reality of us being separated from our body and being in the presence of the Lord is true. But when anyone comes along and they take a snarky attitude toward people in the Lord's church, for example, these people who come here in good faith and they want to learn, like, and I won't chase the rabbit, but we had someone come in who wanted to teach, or he got into young versus older, not young or old, because we had young and old, and the only old ones I knew had knowledge from the books that were published by the seminary. And the president of the seminary, Dr. L.D. Foreman, had organized the church 75 years ago, February 15th, 1950. And the dean of students, Dr. L.D. Capel, an author of books as well, had also been involved in organizing our church. So we have their books still in the library. We have their recordings and audio tapes. So yes, we had people who were well aware. But now, I'd never understood that those things could be used to speak in a diminutive way, because they all seemed like such godly people. They believed salvation by grace. They were willing to be baptized into that body, that fellowship. They were willing to participate in that fellowship that was into the gospel. They were heads of their households, fathers to their children, husbands to their wives. They were brothers in the covenant. So they were exemplary people. So whatever that was. But so now, having the view, a complete view, if you will, I'm showing you what the text says. And then if someone says this is not simultaneous, which is in the Vulgate as well, simul, S-I-M-U-L, and together with them, which you can read that even in the King James, it says, together with them, we will be seized away in clouds unto a meeting. As my friend told me, I remember what he said. It said it wasn't unto a passing. It was, we're not passing in the air. It's a meeting. So I laughed when he made that observation, and a person who went before him and told him that. A meeting of the Lord, a come to Jesus meeting, if you will, into air. This appears, I think, 7 times in the Greek New Testament, and it's translated in our Bible, air, every time. And in this manner, we shall always be together with the Lord. And then in Matthew 24:29, Jesus said, immediately after the tribulation. So when I put these together, especially questioned about it, I want to know, what's the text say first? And then, of course, now you know that there's preterism, which there are things that were fulfilled in the past. So if you're a partial futurist, or someone said they're a partial preterist, I said, well, that means you're a partial futurist. And they said, of course. So we know there were things that took place then, especially, as Dr. Penn said, on a very small scale, things will escalate. So that the dispute, and I don't know that many people. The person who was teaching pre-trib passed away. The man that was teaching post-trib, I don't know where he's at now, what fellowship. I know he's still somewhere in the state of Arkansas. He's just not here with us any longer. And then I think that's about it. Those were the two who had volumes of work that they had done, and I was very impressed. One was moving into technology, something called PowerPoint. So here's what we can learn is preterism's past, historicism is history, all through history, and then futurism. So you have to really do some research on those. I found a preterist website that did a lot of my research on the historical. And then also, as a disclosure, when I was in the university here, Arkansas at Little Rock, the teacher of New Testament survey, Dr. Knudsen, we studied in Revelation those ecclesias and what they endured, persecution by the tyrannical Caesars and by the maniacal religious legalist, if you will, and how they would antagonize the government against them just as they did Jesus. So my view had much to do with understanding Revelation as it was perceived by the original receptors. And you can study that absolutely. Now, I've taught that manner 5 different times, 3 where I'm at now and twice where I once was in Northeast Arkansas. But that's excruciating to notice what they went through and endured. So for me to endure people not able to sort and notice, now, wait a minute, get out all your dispensational charts, get out your historical premillennial chart, your dispensational premillennial chart, and then there's so many more out there. And then there's premillennial, amillennial, postmillennial, if you have the time. And of course, though, so if we're talking about dispensationalism, and some have sent in some excellent feedback showing their rationale for their perspective in dispensationalism. And I have a great respect for that. They did the work, they studied it, they reasoned it out, and they worked it out, just as I have a great respect for those who are advocating the apostasy as departure, and they work to give their own rationale. You just don't meet people that bother to develop a rationale, even though I might not appropriate whatever all that is, just as I'm just staying with this. So how would I move from simultaneously seized away together with them? And that is, if Jesus comes back after the tribulation, and I have it worded out that he does, and then when he returns, then we ourselves, the ones who are living, the ones who are remaining around, will be seized away simultaneously together with them in clouds. Well, you can say that same thing explicitly stated in the English Bible, what we know as our King James Bible. So that you can't really blame this observation on the Koine text. It's just that I used it as I've never concealed the fact that I target texts where there's a lot of energy, even controversy, even disputation. And again, I also intervene for people. There are several who recently, when someone, as I say, speaks down and to the point of pressuring and coercing or ridiculing or humiliating people, then I'll just step in and point out that the person can't even read a text, because I don't say that someone has to know Greek and Hebrew. I was told I needed to know it, but that was in university, and I looked for where would I go to learn that. Not to learn that so I could pastor, but to learn that so I could know what is this. So if you're in a university class and they mention a Greek word, and they will mention a Hebrew word, and they will, then eventually you'll want to learn that, or you might want to learn that. And if you do, then that's why I attended the oldest Bible school in the state of Arkansas, the seminary, and that was education. That was a learning organization, and professors would teach you to study for yourself. So working through this and going ahead and having it on the board so that I can keep time abridged, mainly to explain that this text isn't a problem, and it's not broken. It's how we use it. How do we, as some people call it, rightly divide it? Some say there's no rapture here. There's a rapture here. I think there's a man named Ruckman, last name Ruckman. I think at one time he developed 2 raptures. Now, I'm certainly not ridiculing. I've not evaluated that. I know we have a video about it, but he taught 2 raptures. So you can really exhaust yourself if you want to look at all of this. But I would say that in the main, we all agree on the fact that Jesus will return bodily, of course, the resurrection of the dead, the judgment. We all know that's coming. But between now and then, the only differences I know of is, like I said, I'm premillennial and wouldn't know how to even entertain the idea that Jesus won't return bodily and reign on the earth for his 1,000-year. He'll have his day, the millennial reign. So again, whatever's going on, it's not doctrinal, or it's not the scripture. It's the dispensationalism. And in it, it's very multivariate. It's starting to be, it can be crowded sometimes. Some charts are exhaustive. Now, that's not a criticism. It's just that, like I said, what I learned by experience was that to bring in a text, to word it out, I could have written this text out in King James English, and someone would have accused me of promoting post-trib, because I would be saying something that might not have really occurred to them, or they may not have heard it. But I'm not advocating that. I'm advocating this is the text. Now, how do you go from this? As how did J.R. Graves develop and understand this to be in phases? I don't know, and I've never studied how he did that. I don't know the rationale behind Dr. Wilkin, except there's other factors that are in play, and then others have sent in feedback. So if you really want to collaborate, study, I would just ask, how would you help someone move from this? And we did it before, as the rapture occur in phases or simultaneously, to receive even more feedback, because it's really intriguing, it's fascinating. But again, I remember the influence that was in our lives, and I remember knowing real people who were taking it very seriously, how they lived, how we lived, so that we would be unashamed at his appearance, that we would be people who had lived our lives in a manner that when we stand before him as believers at the judgment seat of Christ, we can give him an account for what we did in the body, whether it was worthless or beneficial. So there are people in the name of religion that can be cruel and say horrible things. They can tell you if you don't believe X, Y, Z, which they don't even have a text that says it. That's why it's faith alone into Christ only. And that's why Jesus said, made it so clear that those who are believing into him already have an everlasting life. So you have a blessed day. Enjoy this lesson.